Shalom and Boker Tov, as we look to the Lord morning by morning, Boker by Boker. Why in the morning? Well, the morning brings daylight, a dawning, new hope, and we know that His mercies are new every morning. And why not pray first thing in the morning? Then you have the rest of the entire day to expect great things, right? Morning time prayer also allows us to prove that everything else can wait. God's got to be first in our morning. In Psalm 5, which is considered a morning prayer, David looks to God and says, such a great thing. He asks him, "You hear my voice, Lord, in the morning, and I direct my prayer to you." David says, I direct my prayer. What does that mean? You know, sometimes we wake up in the morning and our thoughts are all over the place. So many things on our minds, appointments and responsibilities. But we are called first to put our prayers in order. Coffee is not the remedy for confusion, but ordered prayer is. David said, I direct my prayer to you. Now that word direct is the same Hebrew word used for when the wood was placed in order on the altar of sacrifice, or for when the showbread was arranged on the table. In that same way, our prayers need to be organized. Our thoughts need to be put in order as we petition the Lord. Spontaneous prayer is great, but God is a God of order. Would we just present ourselves before a king without thinking beforehand, or even putting into order some kind of mandate as to what we are petitioning from this king? Order is important. Psalm 5 also points to the personal nature of prayer. He specifically asks God to give ear to his words. It's as if David is bringing into view the ears of God. This is what we call an anthropomorphism. It's a figure of speech which gives God human form, so to speak. Actually, it speaks to us because it helps us connect with God. It helps us connect with how he operates. It helps us understand his nature. It helps us connect with God's humanity, his personhood, and his desire to be personable with us. He is the almighty and incomprehensible God, whose thoughts are not our thoughts and whose ways are not our ways, yet he invites us, he beckons us to speak with him. He gives us his ears. All of this creates a beautiful picture for how our prayers go from our mouth right to God's ears. And we know that we know that David prayed very specifically for things. For example, he said, Lord, when shall I go and attack the Philistines? It's very specific. Well, don't we as well ask God for specific provisions, for specific needs when we come to him in prayer? Now, as to how God answers or when he answers brings us to a very timely example that we have just read about during the Christmas story, but it's available to us all year round. We have Miriam, Joseph, and Yeshua, and they needed to leave Nazareth very quickly because Herod was after them. And it was at this very time when God provided all the material wealth they would need for this trip to Egypt. Note that these gifts were not given at the time of Yeshua's birth. You know how we run around all the time looking for special, much-needed gifts for that mom who just has her newborn babe. Would we think of waiting 2 years before giving this mother a gift that she should have received at newborn time? Of course not. So we have a very different picture here of what is expected and when God gives. These specific gifts did not come at the time of Yeshua's birth, but rather when he was already a toddler, probably around 2 years old, and specifically when it was needed. That's the point. And look who came to give the gifts of gold, myrrh, and frankincense to this Jewish Messiah. We would have thought it would come from a Jewish family member, but it came from out-of-state foreigners, from Gentiles. The Lord's provisions can come from a place that we would not have expected it to come. Yet this is exactly when and what Joseph and Miriam needed for their flight to Egypt. These were, by the way, meticulously chosen gifts, which were going to prove to be very valuable. Why? Because frankincense and myrrh were in very high demand in Egypt for cosmetics or for use in Egyptian worship. This family was going to get all the financial support they needed while over in Egypt because of the specificity of the gift. So God takes care of everything. And sure, the money could have come in earlier, maybe even at Yeshua's birth, but it didn't come in then. Who knows how many valuable lessons the parents learned during that season of little. So what we learn is that whatever circumstance we face, God provides, but often differently from what we might have expected or what we might have wanted. And so we think about ourselves, and the problem is when we think about God's provisions and see them through earthly lenses. Earthly lenses rob us of our true worth. We think that if God really loves us, He would dress us up with at least a little bit of wealth and provide for us those things that we have set our heart's desire on. But when we put on our other set of lenses, those spiritual spectacles, we don't even realize how much we have waiting for us, how much we already own, how much the Lord has already provided for us. Think about the promise concerning the land of Israel, given to the Jewish people. Now, up to this point in time, they have not received it in full. But the provision is there, it's just in waiting. Look at Obadiah verse 17. And there we're going to read a future time when Israel will what? She will possess her possessions. What that means is that she will obtain what she already owns. Remember when Joshua and the children of Israel walked into the land? Do you remember what that land was called? It was called the Promised Land. Why? Because it was already promised to them. It was already theirs, given through Abraham. But now what they needed to do was walk into the land and take possession of it. These are two very important matters and different matters. Provision is what God has already provided, but we need to now take possession of those promises, of those provisions. When we consider all the spiritual provisions that God has already supplied us with, we should be blown away, but we need to realize what they are and take possession of them and use them. The frankincense, the myrrh, and the gold would have done very little for these parents had they not used it. The same thing goes for these spiritual blessings. We sometimes think we have so little, but we have so much. We are rich like kings and queens. When we read Ephesians chapter 1 and we start counting all the spiritual blessings which we already possess, already blessed with, already given at our new birth, we should be amazed. These blessings include, for example, being made holy and blameless, being adopted as God's children. You know what that means? It means that we can call Father Abba, and it means that we have access to Abba's throne, a place where we are instructed to go to with boldness and confidence. This spot is already reserved for us. Are we taking all the appointment times we need to be with God? Provision is made, and God has an ear to hear. Are we taking possession of it and using it? Another Ephesians blessing is forgiveness. It's already been granted to us. Yet many of us have not taken hold of that true freedom that comes with God's forgiveness, and then using that provision to forgive others. The Lord's provision of forgiveness is so great that we could even forgive and love an enemy, just like David, just like Joseph did his brothers. If we take hold of forgiveness, we can serve God with clean hands and a clean heart, and then we will lack absolutely nothing. Are we coming daily to God with directed prayer, asking, just as Caleb did, for that portion of land that was promised him? You remember Caleb? He waited 45 years. He was 85 years old when he asked Joshua for that inheritance that was already given to him. Joshua blessed him and fulfilled the promise made so many years earlier. With that same assurance of what we already own, the spiritual blessings and the spiritual gifts that God has given, let's come by faith with thankfulness, with humility, and let God direct us to use what He has already provided us with. We need patience, we need trust, we need faith in those promises already guaranteed. We are His forever, and He alone is our inheritance. So let's walk morning by morning, Boker by Boker with him. Take hold of and use what is already in our possession. Have a blessed day and have much shalom in Messiah Yeshua. Shalom.